And finally, we're going to discuss how to prepare for online teaching. Many of the concepts in this video will be explored in greater detail in the modules of this course. The purpose of this video is to lay the groundwork for what lies ahead. It may be helpful to you to take notes on what you learn in this video, as it may help you form questions about course content later in the course. In this video, we'll explore some of the best practices in online education in short detail, just to prepare you for what lies ahead. Here we'll examine preparing the course for online delivery, dealing with student expectations, and scaling your workflow. 1. Preparing the course for online delivery. Because students expect and often even need an online course to be available to them at all hours so that they can fit the complex work of the course into their own schedules, it is considered a best practice to map out your course before the official start date of the semester. That means you need to plan out and prepare materials for your entire course before it begins. One of the ways we do that is through a model called backwards design. In this model, you start by thinking about what you want your students to be able to do at the end of the course, kind of like the destination on a roadmap. You first ask, where are you going? And then you ask how you'll get there and what you need to do to prepare for the journey. We'll explore this in much greater detail later in the course. To begin the process, create measurable learning outcomes using active verbs and, in some cases, quantity. For example, you might say to students, using second person, you will demonstrate 2 to 3 best practices in online education. Here you have both measurability, demonstrate, and quantity, 2 to 3. This makes it easier to see if your students meet their learning goals by the end of the term. Next, consider how you will get your students to those outcomes. What kind of instruction will you need to offer to get your students from the beginner mind to whatever level of mastery you've decided is necessary? Remember to employ multiple modalities too, such as videos, graphics, and text to ensure that students really have an opportunity to process your content. After you've figured out how you will teach them, now it's time to determine what those assessments will be. This is sometimes the trickiest part in online course development because faculty new to online teaching have a hard time imagining what can be done on the web. It doesn't always have to be papers and discussion board posts. You can have students do presentations through video, live discussion through video conferencing, or asynchronous discussion through specialized video software. Just remember that if you ask students to do anything synchronous in an online class, it's really important that you advertise that before they register for the course. Otherwise, they may become frustrated by their scheduling conflicts. But one last thing about assessments. You can also ask your students to differentiate their assessments, which allows them the opportunity to explore new technology that fits within their comfort zone while also exposing you to what's out there. Here's an example of a differentiated assignment and tools matrix that I created and that you are free to use and modify as you like. And finally, now that you have your course all planned out, you need to implement your strategies in the course website. That means you need to create navigation, make simple web pages, create places for students to have discussion and hand in assignments, and organize that material in a way that students can figure out how it all works. Don't worry, we'll cover all of that in much greater detail later in the course. 2. Dealing with student expectations. Because online learning can also be nebulous to students, sometimes their expectations don't match the instructors. For example, in our digital age, many students expect immediate feedback when they send an email because they've become so used to it from texting. It is not practical, however, for a professor to always be available, let alone to respond to emails at midnight on Saturdays. When designing your syllabus and your opening materials, it is best to be very clear about the edges or limits of your course material. For example, tell students what they can expect from you for correspondence. Will it take you 24 hours to reply to emails? Or 72 hours? Will you respond to emails on school vacations or weekends? Or are you going to take that time off? Next, consider how you'll organize due dates for class materials. It is generally best to be consistent with the due dates for coursework. For example, some teachers give students work on Mondays and let them work through the material all week long, handing in work on Sunday night before 11:59 p.m. Other instructors will try to keep weekends off and have consistent due dates for work of Wednesdays and Fridays every week. It is also important that you think through the due time. Online students are very used to 11:59 p.m. as their due time for coursework. So if you say something is due on Tuesday, the student might not hand it in until the middle of the night on Tuesday. If you need it sooner, you need to tell them so that they can prepare for that. Just remember to be consistent. If you want things in at noon, make sure that every assignment is due at noon. Also, consider how and when you will provide student feedback. After a student submits work, they may not have any interaction with you until you give them feedback. They are used to immediate feedback in a face-to-face course. That is, the teacher can say, "Thank you for handing in your paper. I'll get this back to you next class period." In the online course, there are no class periods, so the student doesn't know when they'll hear from you. Give them some sense of when to expect feedback in a statement, such as, "It will take me at least a week to grade your work. Check back for feedback after that." And finally, consider how and when you will interact with student discussions. Because online discussion is often time-sensitive and text-based, students will expect to see you interacting with discussion boards during whatever period of time you set aside for that particular discussion. At the same time, if you try to respond to every single discussion board post in your class, you will quickly get burned out. Will you respond to student discussions on a rotating basis, where you choose 3 students to respond to every week? Will you respond in one blanket announcement where you unify all the discussion threads into one response for the whole class? Think it through and tell students upfront how you plan to interact with the discussions so that they know that you are monitoring their discussions even if you're not necessarily interacting with every single thread. And lastly, number 3, scaling your workflow. It is no secret that strong online courses are potentially more work than face-to-face courses, at least up front. We've already introduced some ways you can scale your workflow when we described thinking through how much you'll be a part of discussion posts. But in what other ways can you scale your workflow? You'll learn tips and tricks for scaling as you start teaching online. That is, you'll pick up things along the way, but in the meantime, consider these ideas. You could create a course video welcome message to your students that you can use for every course that you teach online. Just keep it generic enough so that it's just an introduction to you as a professor and not to course content. And now that resource has infinite replay value. You can also create rubrics for grading discussion board posts that can be applied universally to all of your online courses. Rubrics allow you to grade very quickly and easily by just clicking buttons that relate to the area of the rubric you are grading. We'll go into more detail about how to use rubrics later, but for now, start thinking about how you might use rubrics for the assignments that you plan to assign. And of course, you can start small and scale up later. This course is designed to help you figure out the basic necessities for your first foray into teaching online. We'll start out really small with just a few strategies for ensuring a strong online course design. You can always add to your toolbox later. For now, let's focus on the bare necessities. I hope you've gotten some inspiration and ideas from this video. Now let's start digging into these concepts in the course modules.